32 children. Learning math with sticks on red dirt. A girl with bare feet counts silently, her lips moving with precision. No desks, no electricity, no government stamp of approval. And yet they show up every morning to learn. Marie was sent to observe, a French diplomat trained in protocol silence and distance. But when President TRAORÉ took her off the official map and into a village with no name, what she saw she could never unsee. A child scribbling equations in the dust. A teacher with no salary, no blackboard, and no fear. And a simple question whispered in broken French. Do people in your country have pencils? That was the moment her mission shattered. She had two options: return and report, or stay and resist. She chose the one thing no report could ever contain: humanity. This story is a work of fiction, but in every detail, the barefoot children, the cracked chalkboard, the questions no one dares to ask, live the truths we often ignore. It may not have happened exactly this way, but the emotion, the injustice, the choice to care, those are very real. So now ask yourself, what would you do if the truth had no flag? The sky above Burkina Faso burned a white so bright it seemed to erase the edges of the world. No clouds, no breeze, just a sheet of heat pressing down on the convoy of black SUVs that rolled through the brittle landscape like foreign objects, too polished, too loud for the silence they were invading. Marie sat in the back seat of the lead vehicle, her blazer crisp despite the heat, her scarf folded precisely across her lap. The convoy's tinted windows offered a distorted reflection of cracked earth and distant silhouettes, ghosts of trees, goats, and the occasional figure standing still enough to resemble statues. She checked her watch. Paris time. Irrelevant here, but still a comfort. They were supposed to go straight to the capital, to the ministry, to the safe zone of embassies and air-conditioned strategy briefings. But President TRAORÉ had sent a message. No meetings, she comes to me first. Marie had met heads of state before. Most wanted cameras and quotes. TRAORÉ had asked for no press, only a driver, a translator, and time. That alone had unsettled the agency. Now as the lead SUV jerked to a stop in a clearing with no sign of civilization, Marie leaned forward. Is this the capital? She asked, only half joking. The driver didn't answer. Outside, dust curled like smoke as the doors swung open. Marie stepped out and immediately felt the air thicken. It didn't move, it pressed. The kind of heat that made your skin feel foreign. She blinked against the glare, her heels crunching on gravel that hadn't seen rain in weeks. President TRAORÉ stood 10 feet away, hands behind his back, not a soldier or aide in sight. He wore a simple cotton tunic rolled to the elbows, dust at the hems. His expression was unreadable, not cold but carved from something older than diplomacy. Marie extended her hand automatically. He didn't shake it. Instead, he said, "Follow me," and began walking toward a narrow trail between broken walls. No greeting, no agenda, no interpreters. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then adjusted her scarf and followed her shoes, already gathering the color of the land. The trail led into what had once been a village. That was the only word her mind could give it: village. But even that felt generous. What she saw were ruins, huts blackened by fire, door frames without doors, a swing set with one rusted chain, still swaying faintly though there was no wind, sandals left in pairs neatly beside walls that no longer stood, as if the people here had left in a hurry or hadn't been allowed to leave at all. Children watched from behind the rubble, not moving, not smiling, just watching. One of them, a boy no older than 6, held up a biscuit wrapper like it was a coin of gold. He didn't run. He didn't beg. He just stared, eyes too steady for his age. Marie's throat tightened. This, TRAORÉ said without turning back, is what they don't put in reports. She didn't answer, because she knew he was right. The smell of ash still lingered. Not fresh, not new, but embedded into the earth like a scar. The silence was unnerving. No chickens, no dogs, no laughter, no radio static. Just the sound of her own breath, shallow and alien. A wall half collapsed bore the faint remains of chalk drawings, stick figures with arms raised. One was holding something that might have been a pencil or a flag. Marie reached for her notebook, then stopped herself. What would she write? Unstable zone, high risk, civilian displacement. That's what the agency would want. But what she felt was something entirely different. This village, Traoré said, finally turning to face her, was erased from the map 2 years ago. But the people stayed. The children stayed. She looked around, at the melted remnants of toys, at a broken pot filled with pebbles, probably used for counting, at a bent nail stuck in the wall where a school bag might once have hung. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, her voice low. Traoré tilted his head. "Because before you sit in a conference room and talk about education reform, you need to understand what a classroom looks like when the world forgets it exists." Marie didn't reply, but something inside her, something carefully trained and sealed by years of protocol, shifted. And in the smallest flicker of a thought, she knew she hadn't come to report. She had come to witness. The next clearing opened, without warning, a sun-bleached field bordered by dry thorn bushes where children stood barefoot in crooked lines. No bell had rung. No teacher had called them to attention. And yet there they were, eyes fixed on a flattened tin sheet nailed to a leaning plank. Their backs straight, their hands empty but ready. Marie stopped. It wasn't the poverty that hit her. She had read the risk assessments, reviewed the economic maps, memorized the briefings. It was the stillness, the order. In a place with no resources, no infrastructure, no desks, no roof, there was still learning. A girl, maybe 8, sat cross-legged in the dust, drawing numbers with a stick. Equations, real ones. Addition, subtraction, long division. The wind blew her hair across her face, but she didn't flinch. She was calculating. Another boy beside her was sorting stones into groups. 7, then 3 taken away, then 4 left. His fingers were stained with red clay, his toes half buried in the soil. And yet in his quiet concentration, there was something oddly dignified. Marie didn't know what to say. Her eyes scanned the space like a camera set to autofocus, but unable to process the scene. It wasn't on the map. It wasn't in the file. It wasn't part of the plan. She opened her notebook instinctively, then stopped again. What could she write? That children were doing math in the dirt with no shoes? That this was resilience? Or was it indictment? She turned and caught a girl staring directly at her. Not shyly, not in awe, but with the kind of gaze that slices straight through the space between question and challenge. Her dress was torn, her knees scraped, her hands dusty, but her eyes, they burned. And in them, Marie saw no plea, only demand. "Do you see us? Do you really?" Then from behind her, Traoré's voice, calm and low, "Your institutions failed. These children haven't." Marie didn't look back. She couldn't, because somehow those words didn't feel like accusation. They felt like judgment that had been waiting far too long to be spoken aloud. The sun dipped low as the motorcade returned to her temporary quarters, a canvas-walled shelter on the edge of the region's last functioning clinic. Inside, the fan creaked overhead, barely stirring the heavy air. Marie couldn't eat, couldn't speak. Her hands hovered over her notes, but her pen refused to obey. That girl's eyes followed her into the silence, her equation still half scratched in the dust. Later that night, long after the others had retreated behind zipped tents and shut doors, Marie heard something, a sound too soft to be threatening, a rhythm, faint, persistent, singing. She followed it barefoot, stepping carefully across the dark earth, until she reached a dim glow beneath an acacia tree. There, under a hanging oil lantern, President Traoré sat cross-legged with 6 children around him. They were counting stones. 7, he said. "Take away 3, a girl whispered. 4. The others clapped, quiet and proud. Marie stood in the shadows, unseen. But inside her, something cracked, not out of pity, out of shame. She had come to observe, but now observation felt like the wrong language. That night, Marie didn't sleep. Not because of the heat, though it was stifling, and not because of the insects tapping rhythmically against the tense canvas. It was the silence inside her own head that kept her awake, stretching out like a desert, vast, dry, and echoing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw numbers scratched in dust. She heard the faint clap of small hands celebrating subtraction. She saw that girl's eyes, not pleading, not even angry, just impossibly steady, as if waiting for Marie to realize something only she could not yet see. She had come here with instructions, a schedule, a chain of command. She had been trained to assess, to document, to remain objective, detached even. But today she had not remained detached. Today had breached something old and protected inside her. She didn't cry when TRAORÉ refused to shake her hand. She didn't cry when she saw the charred swing or the biscuit wrapper. But now alone in a space meant for authority and observation, she wept. And it surprised her. It wasn't pity, it was shame. Not because they had nothing, but because, despite having nothing, they still stood straighter than she did. Still learned, still smiled, still counted, still believed. She pressed the heels of her palms into her eyes, furious at the tears. They weren't supposed to be there. They weren't part of the protocol. But they came anyway, hot and bitter, not from the outside in, but from some deep fault line within her that had gone undisturbed for too long. Beside her travel bag sat the red notebook. It was meant for field notes, coded assessments, behavior logs, the kind of data that could be fed into reports and translated into funding proposals or government briefings. But now it felt weightless, irrelevant. She picked it up anyway, and for the first time since arriving, she opened it not as a diplomat, but as a person. Her hands shook slightly as she wrote the first line. What they lack in money, they carry in courage. She stared at the sentence, then underlined the word courage twice, because that was the difference. Not the dust, not the numbers, not the lack of desks or shoes or paper. It was the courage, quiet, steady, undemanding, of people who kept showing up in a world that had stopped noticing they were there. She thought about the agency, about the cold white hallways in Paris, the buzz of coffee machines and the constant typing, the weekly bulletins that listed statistics with no names, no smells, no colors, just charts, just metrics, just distance. That wasn't this. This was something else. She set down the pen. Her fingers lingered on the spine of the notebook like it was something alive, something sacred. Then in a whisper that no one heard but herself, she said it out loud. I want to return, alone. The words startled her even as they left her mouth. She hadn't meant to say them, but now that they were spoken, they felt anchored in her chest. Not as rebellion, not even as a choice, but as a truth. She no longer wanted the convoy, the security team, the checklist of approved questions. She wanted to walk into that clearing with no title, no clipboard, no expectation. Just eyes, just hands, just time. Somewhere beyond the tent wall, an owl called once and went quiet. A child coughed. The generator in the distance hummed and sputtered. The world had not changed, but Marie had. Tomorrow she would request an unofficial return. She would ask for leave, claim a personal interest in local education models. That was the language they would understand. But she already knew that none of it mattered, because what had started as an assignment had cracked open into something else. She hadn't come here to monitor. She had come to witness. And once you truly see, you can never go back to pretending you haven't. 2 weeks later, she returned. No convoy, no armored SUVs, no translator in a suit. Just Marie sitting behind a weathered motorbike driver who spoke little French, arms tight around her satchel, red notebook pressed to her chest. They drove for hours across bone-dry fields and cracked roads through stretches of emptiness that looked almost lunar, sparse trees, windswept dust goats chewing plastic near rusted fences. The sun was already high when they arrived at the edge of the village. No one greeted her. No one saluted. There were no handshakes, no guards, no formalities. Just silence, and then somewhere nearby the sound of children singing. She followed it instinctively, walking past half-built walls and crooked wooden doors through alleys that smelled of smoke and soap and sweat. The song grew louder, bright voices chanting numbers, repeating rhythms, laughter between mistakes. She turned a corner and stopped. There in the same clearing as before were at least 20 children, barefoot, dusty but beaming. They sat in a loose circle, clapping to a beat as one boy led them in multiplication songs. They had no books, only thin scraps of cardboard with numbers scrawled in charcoal. A girl used a piece of slate from a broken roof tile to show her answer to the group. The others clapped when she got it right. And when she didn't, they laughed, not to mock her, but as if to say, "Try again. We're here." No adult was in sight. No official teacher. Just children teaching children. Marie watched from the shadows for several minutes, arms folded, chest tightening. It wasn't just impressive, it was beautiful. Then a voice beside her. "You came back." She turned. It was Amadou, the boy with the pebbles from before. His shirt was 2 sizes too big and patched at the shoulder. His feet were calloused and dusty. His expression open proud. "You remember me?" she asked. "Of course," he said. "I was the one doing -7. She smiled. "Can I see your school?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "This is my school. I mean, where you study when you're not here." He gestured toward the alley. "Come." They walked side by side past a row of half-standing homes, chickens scattered at their feet. The sun bore down, but he didn't seem to notice. They stopped in front of a cracked mud hut. One room, no windows, a blanket for a door. He pushed it open and stepped inside. "This is where I sleep," he said, "and where I do my homework when it's raining." The walls were lined with charcoal scribbles, math problems, words, names in uneven script. A broken pot held pencils worn down to their nubs. A piece of fabric stretched between two nails served as a shelf balancing a single book with torn pages. Marie stood quietly, letting it sink in. Amadou pointed to a mark on the wall near the door. "I leave at 4. In the morning," she asked, startled. "Yes, it takes me 2 hours to walk here, but I don't want to miss math." Marie sat down on the edge of a stone ledge. Her throat felt tight again, not from heat but from something deeper. A pressure in her chest that had no name. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you care so much about math?" He shrugged. "Because I want to become someone who solves things." She looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time since returning, she realized what had changed. It wasn't the village. It wasn't the poverty. It wasn't even the children. It was her. She was no longer watching. She was learning. The sun had begun to slip behind the horizon, casting the village in a deep, warm gold that made every shadow longer and every sound feel softer. Marie sat beneath a low tree near the edge of the school, clearing her notebook resting open on her lap, though her pen had not moved in several minutes. Around her, the children had broken into smaller groups, finishing their last lessons in hushed tones and bursts of laughter. Some were drawing shapes in the dirt. Others were simply watching the light fade. That's when Fauna approached. She was younger than Marie had remembered, maybe 7, maybe 8, but her posture had the quiet confidence of someone much older. She wore a blue dress with a torn sleeve and carried a bundle of rags that might have once been a school bag. In one hand, she clutched a yellow pencil, short-chewed and dulled to almost nothing. "Bonjour," she said shyly, then sat beside Marie without waiting for permission. Marie smiled. "Bonjour." For a moment, they both watched the others in silence. Then Fauna held up the pencil as if she were showing off a treasure found in the earth. "I held a pencil for the first time last month," she said, her voice clear and proud. "It felt like magic." Marie turned to look at her. "Magic?" Fauna nodded. "Before that, I could only speak out loud. But with this," she lifted the pencil again gently like it might crumble, "I could make words stay. Even when I go to sleep, even when the wind comes." Marie stared at the pencil. It was so small it looked ready to disappear into Fauna's fingers. Just a stub, half wood, half lead, no eraser. The kind of thing that in Paris would have been thrown away without a second thought. Then Fauna looked up at her with a seriousness that didn't match her size. "Do people in your country have pencils?" Marie's throat caught. It wasn't the question itself, but the way it was asked. Not with envy, not with resentment, but with genuine curiosity, as if the idea of a place filled with pencils was a kind of myth. A distant world where magic was abundant, not rare. She opened her mouth to answer, closed it again. Because how could she say that yes, in her country, pencils were everywhere, that they rolled beneath desks, got lost in couch cushions, snapped from boredom during meetings, that most people never thought twice about them, that they weren't symbols of power, just objects taken for granted. So she didn't answer. Instead, she opened her red notebook, slowly turned to a blank page and began to write. A pencil is not a weapon, but it can change everything. When she looked up, Fauna was watching her hand move across the page with quiet reverence. "You write fast," Fauna whispered. Marie smiled. "Only when I'm learning." The two of them sat together as the sky turned violet and the lanterns flickered to life. In the growing dark, the pencil still gleamed, small, bright, and full of promise. The next morning began not with alarms, but with singing, soft and steady, rising like smoke from the center of the village. Marie followed the sound, weaving through narrow footpaths, still damp with dew, her shoes already caked in earth. The red notebook was tucked under her arm, her pen behind her ear. She didn't know what she'd be writing today, only that she would. When she arrived at the makeshift classroom, she saw him, a young man no more than 20 standing barefoot in front of 24 children. His shirt was faded sleeves, rolled collar frayed. His skin glistened under the morning sun, but he paid it no mind. He held a piece of white limestone, like chalk, and was writing equations on a sheet of flattened tin, nailed to 2 sticks. The tin shimmered in the heat, half mirror, half canvas. 3 plus 2, he said, tapping the board. Fauna 5 came the answer from the second row, bright and proud. Good, he nodded. Now, in reverse, 5. -3, the children shouted together. 2. He smiled the kind of smile that could hold up a wall even after the roof collapsed. Marie stood at the edge, observing quietly. After a few minutes, he noticed her and nodded. There was no surprise, no suspicion. Just welcome, simple and open. When the lesson ended, the children rushed forward, laughing, teasing, chasing each other in wide, joyful loops. Marie stepped closer. "You're their teacher?" she asked. He nodded. "Salif." Officially, he gave a small laugh. "There's nothing official about this place." She offered her hand. He shook it firm, warm, without hesitation. "No salary?" she asked. He shook his head. "No government support?" Another shake. "No books?" A pause. "Sometimes pages? From old ones?" "We share. In your training, I was good at math. That's all." Marie looked at the tin board again, the limestone worn to half its size. Beneath it sat a rusted paint can filled with sticks and stones, makeshift manipulatives. Next to it, a pile of folded cardboard sheets, each covered in numbers, drawings, half-erased answers. The ground itself was lined with scratch marks, reminders of past lessons never quite washed away. "Why do you keep teaching?" she asked genuinely. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the children instead, now chasing a deflated ball, shrieking in delight every time it bounced awkwardly off a rock. Then he said quietly, "Because they believe in tomorrow, even if we don't have one yet." Marie froze. She had heard speeches in Parliament. She had read strategic education frameworks, sat through roundtable discussions about global literacy. But no policy ever said it like that. No briefing ever captured that sentence. She opened her notebook. Her hand moved without thinking. "They believe in tomorrow even if we don't have one yet." Salif. Then she looked back at her previous pages, the ones she had written days earlier. Cold clinical phrases, geographic coordinates, names and age ranges, population density, keywords like unsanctioned gathering and non-state education model. She cringed. Now her writing was different. Now the notebook no longer sounded like a diplomat. It sounded like a human being. She turned a fresh page. A boy solves equations with pebbles. A girl saves half a pencil like it's made of gold. A teacher with no degree gives the future shape using rusted tin and limestone dust. She stopped, breathed, then wrote more. Not for a report, not for her superiors, but because some truths don't belong in a file. They belong in memory, in pages stained with red dirt and sunlight, in the quiet space between someone else's courage and your own awakening. It began with a wind too soft to take seriously, a breeze that slipped through the trees and lifted the corners of lesson sheets like curious fingers. Marie had just arrived that afternoon, red notebook in hand, planning to observe a geometry lesson Salif was preparing using string and hand-drawn shapes. The children were gathered, seated on stones or crouching in the dirt, tracing angles in the dust with sticks. Fauna was drawing a triangle when the sky changed. Not gradually, but all at once. The light dimmed and the air stilled, as if the world had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Salif paused mid-sentence and looked up. A single drop fell on his forehead, another on the tin board. Then the sky opened. The rain came fast, hard and loud, like applause from the heavens, sudden and wild and unrelenting. Within seconds, dust turned to sludge. The tin board clanged under the assault. Children shrieked, first in surprise, then in laughter, then in panic as their precious notes and cardboard pages began to curl, collapse, dissolve. "Get the papers," someone shouted, and the moment became a scramble. Tiny hands reached into mud. Children slipped and crawled and grabbed what they could: math problems, spelling lists, half-finished drawings. The laminated corner of a salvaged book was torn from its spine and flung like a leaf into the air. Marie didn't hesitate. She dropped her bag beneath the nearest ledge and ran into the downpour dress, heavy hair uncoiling in thick strands across her cheeks. Her shoes sank with every step. She caught sight of Fauna struggling to hold a soggy armful of notes against her chest, her small frame shaking beneath the weight and the water. Marie reached her and helped lift the bundle, shielding it with her own arms. Just then a gust of wind tore one sheet free, a child's assignment, written in charcoal on the back of a flattened banana leaf. It spun through the air, tumbling like a bird caught in a storm. Marie lunged instinctively. She slipped in the mud, landed hard hands, splashing into the soaked earth. But her eyes stayed on the leaf. It skidded, floated, danced along the shallow rivulets forming through the clearing. She chased it, knee-soaked palms, filthy lungs burning with rain and adrenaline. Finally, just before it vanished beneath a corrugated scrap of roof metal, she grabbed it. The leaf was trembling in her fingers, edges torn, ink smudged. But the numbers were still legible. Division problems. A name scrawled at the top, Amadou. She stared at it like it was something holy. Not because it was perfect, but because it had survived. She held it above her head and stood drenched from head to toe, eyes squinting against the torrent. Around her, the children were still fighting to save what they could. Salif was pulling the tin board under a tree. Fauna was stuffing soggy papers into a broken plastic bucket. Laughter mixed with shouts. Desperation mixed with joy. It was chaos, but it was alive. Marie walked back toward the group, leaf in hand, her steps slower, now reverent. She found Amadou crouched near the tin board, trying to dry a half-blank sheet against his shirt. "Is this yours?" she asked. He looked up, blinked rain from his eyes, and nodded. "I thought it was gone." Marie handed him the leaf gently, like scripture returned to a prophet. He took it with both hands, grateful quiet. She looked at the others, soaked, muddy, laughing, and realized they weren't mourning the ruined classroom. They were rebuilding it already with their hands, their buckets, their stubborn joy. The school wasn't the tin or the dirt or the chalk. It was them. She opened her red notebook, water-streaked and warping at the edges, and wrote, "It rained today." But they didn't run. They saved their future from the flood. Then she smiled because for the first time in her life, she didn't just believe in education. She belonged to it. The rain didn't stop. Not quickly, not politely. It poured for hours like the sky had been holding its breath for months and now couldn't stop exhaling. But something shifted after the first panic of saving papers, after the scramble to gather pages, chalk and slate. What had begun in chaos slowly melted into something else, into joy. The clearing turned into a riverbed of laughter. Shoes were tossed aside. Buckets were abandoned. Children ran arms, flung wide faces upturned. They spun in circles, kicking water, slipping and falling and shrieking with delight. Salif tried to hold order for a few minutes, barking half-hearted reminders about keeping dry and avoiding injury, but eventually even he gave in. He let the chalk drop. He laughed, loudly. Marie stood beneath the low eave of a shed, soaked from earlier, still holding the red notebook at her side. She should have gone to dry off. She should have returned to the shelter to change. But her legs wouldn't move. She watched them, these children, with nothing, dance in the storm as if they had everything. Fauna lay flat in the muddy grass and let the rain pool on her palms. Amadou chased a plastic lid like it was a racing car. Salif used the tin sheet as a drum, tapping a rhythm that the children picked up with their feet. Marie laughed, first quietly, then helplessly. Something inside her cracked open, not with sadness, but with lightness. She felt 10 years younger, or maybe just 10 years realer. And suddenly a memory broke through, so vivid it stunned her. She was 8 again in the backyard of her grandmother's house in Normandy. A summer storm had come without warning, turning the trimmed hedges and gravel paths into rivers and ponds. She and her brother had rushed outside, ignoring her mother's shouts, letting the water soak their pajamas. They had danced like fools, barefoot and fearless. She remembered the smell of wet stone, the sting of cold water on flushed skin, the way her brother had tried to catch raindrops on his tongue. She hadn't thought of that day in years. Now, watching these children who had known so much more of the world's cruelty than she ever had, she felt something loosen in her chest. Her heartbeat slowed. Her body stopped resisting the wet clothes, the stickiness, the mess. She stepped out into the rain again, not to save anything, not to chase anything, just to be there. The earth beneath her feet was soft, alive. Mud splashed up her calves. Her hair clung to her face, but she didn't care. The sky could keep pouring forever. And in the middle of it all, Fauna ran toward her, grabbed both her hands and pulled her into the circle. They spun, around and around. Marie stumbled, laughed, nearly fell, but didn't let go. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like this, the kind that starts in the lungs, but ends somewhere deeper. For a moment, the world wasn't broken. It wasn't burning. It was just rain and laughter, and skin touching skin in rhythm with the sky. Later, as the clouds broke and the sun returned like a shy guest, she sat on a rock to breathe. Her dress clung to her like second skin. She opened the notebook, the pages slightly wrinkled now from the damp, and wrote in a slanted looping script, "The rain didn't cleanse the earth, it cleansed me." She underlined the last word, because that's what it had done. It had rinsed her free of layers. She didn't know she was wearing distance detachment duty. It had left behind nothing polished, nothing professional. Only a woman sitting in the mud, finally feeling what it means to be human again. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The laptop screen glowed faintly in the dim tent. Outside, the crickets had begun their nightly chorus, 1,000 tiny pulses rising and falling like breath. Marie sat hunched over the keyboard, still damp from the afternoon rain, her fingers hovering above the keys like she didn't recognize them. The message from Paris had arrived that morning, polite but firm. Status update required. Submit phase 1 evaluation within 24 hours. Focus on compliance infrastructure and influence of unauthorized education networks. She had read it twice, then 3 more times. Now the cursor blinked on a blank screen, relentless and silent. The draft was due. The protocol was clear. She was to describe, assess, and label. That was her job. She began typing. Infiltrated educational zones show moderate influence on surrounding communities, lacking approved oversight. Non-sanctioned actors have established informal learning systems that may compromise. She stopped. Her hand hovered over the backspace key. She stared at the words. Cold, empty, sterile. Every syllable designed to keep distance, to reduce what she'd seen into language that would never make anyone care. She thought of Fauna's pencil, of Salif's tin board, of Amadou waking at 4 a.m. to walk for math, of children dancing in the rain with laughter so real it echoed days later in her chest. She couldn't do it. She couldn't betray them by using words that stripped them of dignity, of truth. Her finger pressed down. Delete. The page went blank again, and for the first time she felt something close to peace. She started over, slowly. There is no electricity, no desks, no textbooks, but there is learning. She paused, then continued. They have no certified teachers, no ink, no chalkboard, but they have trust. Her fingers began to move faster. What they lack in resources, they make up for in courage. They arrive every day with questions, and they leave with wonder. It is not perfect, but it is real. She sat back. She couldn't send this, not officially, not yet, but she also couldn't erase it. She opened her encrypted channel and typed a new message to the regional director. Delaying report. Further observation required. She clicked send. There would be questions, possibly consequences, but she no longer cared about satisfying systems that didn't see what she saw. She had been sent to evaluate, but had been transformed by witnessing. The screen dimmed. She closed the laptop and reached for her notebook, flipping to a clean page. Her handwriting was messier now, less practiced, more alive. She wrote, "They have no electricity, but they have hope, and sometimes hope is enough to light the mind." She underlined the word light. Somewhere in the dark, a child laughed in their sleep. And Marie smiled because, for the first time, her truth didn't need to be approved. It just needed to be lived. The knock came just before dusk, 2 firm raps against the bamboo frame of the clinic shelter. Marie looked up from her notebook, her thoughts still tangled in a quote from Salif she had transcribed hours earlier. Outside, the heat had begun to ease and the first stars blinked through the haze. She opened the flap to find a man standing there, tall, clean-shaven. His beige shirt perfectly pressed, his black shoes dustless despite the road. He smiled the way diplomats are taught to, just enough to imply familiarity, not enough to promise intimacy. "Marie Delone," he asked in French. "Yes," she said, uncertain. "I'm Louis. Louis Morel." Embassy liaison. I was told you were here. Marie didn't move. Something in her chest tightened, though she couldn't name why. Mind if I join you for dinner, he added. I hear the stew here is rustic. There was no reason to refuse, and yet every instinct in her body whispered that something was off. Still, she stepped aside, motioning him in. The clinic staff had prepared a small meal goat stew with okra plantain and rice served in chipped enamel bowls. The room was warm, lit by 2 oil lanterns and the soft hum of village conversation outside. Marie and Louis sat across from each other at the narrow table. He looked out of place, too polished, too clean, his scent still laced with cologne. He made small talk at first, comments about the weather, questions about food distribution logistics. But Marie had seen this dance before. It was surveillance disguised as curiosity. Then came the moment, casual in tone, sharp in intent. You've gone native, haven't you? She looked up sharply. His spoon paused midair, his smile unchanged. I mean, he continued lightly. Your messages have become vague. You're requesting extensions, refusing directives, and now, handwritten notes. That's not quite protocol, is it? Marie said nothing. She folded her hands in her lap. Her heartbeat had quickened, but her voice stayed level. I'm doing my job. Louis tilted his head. Are you? A moment of silence passed. Outside, children laughed. Someone sang softly, and a goat bleated behind the wall. Inside, the air turned heavier. Then he leaned forward just slightly and lowered his voice. You know how these reports work. Context matters. Language matters. You write it the wrong way, it becomes ammunition for the wrong people. There was no threat in his tone, and yet every syllable carried weight. Marie didn't answer. She finished her stew slowly, her appetite gone. When he rose to leave, she offered him no handshake. By morning, the village had already heard. Salif met her near the well, face unreadable. Who was the man in the embassy shirt? Marie sighed. Just someone checking if I still speak their language. Fauna approached barefoot and curious. Is he here to take you away? Marie crouched beside her. No, not yet. But the seed was planted. Word spreads fast where walls don't exist, where trust is built. Not on contracts, but on time-shared food offered, stories exchanged in the dark. That day, Marie walked through the village differently. The children still smiled, but their eyes watched her longer. Not with fear, but with the question no one dared ask out loud. Who do you belong to now? And for the first time, Marie wasn't sure how to answer. The silence was different now. It wasn't the quiet of focus or the hush that came when Salif spoke. It was a silence laced with distance, with something that had once been warm now cooled into caution. Marie felt it the moment she stepped into the clearing. No one looked up. The children were still gathered, sitting in a loose circle around the tin sheet, practicing subtraction. But their eyes remained down, locked to the ground or the numbers in front of them. Not one smile, not one nod. Even Fauna, who always rushed to greet her, stayed seated. Her hands were busy organizing pebbles into neat rows, her shoulders drawn in tight. Marie took a hesitant step forward, waiting for some acknowledgement. None came. She turned slightly, searching for Salif, but he was on the other side of the yard, talking with Amadou in low tones. Neither looked her way. She sat on a nearby stone notebook, unopened. The wind tugged at the edges of her scarf. A goat bleated nearby. Someone sneezed. A bird took off from a broken branch. Still no one spoke to her. The quiet wrapped around her like a veil, not angry, not accusing. Just separate. And that hurt more. It was then she noticed the gloves. A pair of soft, cream-colored gardening gloves folded neatly beside the well, the ones she had brought from Paris weeks ago, thinking they might be useful for the students handling sharp tin or heavy pots. She had meant them as a gesture, a small kindness. Now they sat untouched, folded with care, but untouched nonetheless. She walked over, picked them up, and held them in her hands. The fabric was clean, almost too clean. She didn't need anyone to say it aloud. They didn't trust her anymore, and they were right. She turned back toward the clearing, watching the students continue their work. Still, no one looked up. Even Fauna kept her eyes locked on her numbers. Marie held the gloves against her chest, then knelt gently beside a low wall where she had once helped the children shield papers from the rain. Her voice, when it came, was soft but clear. You trusted me, she said aloud, though no one answered. I didn't trust you with the truth. She placed the gloves on the wall. No drama, no gesture, just a final. She looked at Fauna one last time. The girl's shoulders tensed as if she heard, but her eyes never lifted. Marie stood. Her steps away from the clearing were slow. Not heavy, not rushed, just deliberate. She didn't cry. There was nothing theatrical in her exit, but every footfall felt like leaving something she couldn't name behind. By the time she reached the edge of the village, her notebook was still tucked beneath her arm, unopened, unread. That silence followed her. Not as punishment, but as proof. Marie walked slowly down the path that led away from the village, boots brushing against the brittle grass, dust rising around her ankles like a soft protest. The morning sun was still low, the light amber and kind, but her chest was heavy with finality. She hadn't planned to say goodbye. That felt performative. She thought perhaps leaving quietly was the more respectful thing, less selfish, less disruptive. She had caused enough waves already. She had just passed the last acacia tree when she heard the sound, quick footsteps behind her, light but urgent. Before she could turn, a hand caught her wrist. She froze. It was Amadou. He didn't speak at first, just held her arm, not tight, not pleading, just firm, present. She turned to face him, and he looked up with a gaze that wasn't angry or even confused, just steady, like someone who had waited long enough for someone else to understand. "We knew," he said simply. "From the first day. The boots were too clean." Marie blinked. Amadou let go of her wrist, took a step back, and shrugged. "We're used to people coming, observing, asking, writing, leaving." There was no bitterness in his voice, only clarity. "But you stayed longer," he added. "You helped. You listened. Even if you didn't always know how." Marie opened her mouth and closed it again. She had no speech to give, no defense. She looked down at her boots, now caked in red dust. Too clean. That phrase stayed in her chest, like a quiet sentence. From behind Amadou, a smaller figure approached. Fauna. Her expression was unreadable, but in her hands she carried something folded neatly, carefully. The gloves. She held them out to Marie. Marie didn't reach for them. "I left those," she said quietly. "I know," Fauna replied, "but class isn't over yet." Those 5 words hit Marie harder than any accusation. Not forgiveness, not forgetfulness. An invitation, a space still open, a door not closed. Fauna stepped forward and pressed the gloves into Marie's hands. "If you want to sit, there's room." Marie looked down at the small, worn gloves, creased from the way they'd been folded, a bit damp from morning mist. Not a gift, a challenge. She looked back at Amadou. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He just waited. Marie took a breath, then turned around. They walked back together. No ceremony, no crowd. Just 2 pairs of feet making soft sounds in the dirt. The village came into view again, just as the first notes of morning lesson songs began, tentative, unsure, but rising. When they reached the clearing, some children looked up. Not all. A few turned back to their slates. A few watched her carefully. No one cheered, but no one turned away either. Marie sat down on a rock at the edge of the circle, not in front, not apart, just there, present. Fauna sat beside her. Amadou handed out scrap papers. Salif gave her a brief glance, half wary, half resigned, and continued his lesson. Marie didn't write in her notebook. She didn't need to. She held the gloves in her lap. Her hands were stained with dust, her scarf damp with sweat, her throat dry from the morning sun. But she stayed, and that was the difference. There were no chairs lined in rows. No stage, no podium, no certificates printed on glossy paper. The only decoration was the sky itself, wide, cloud-brushed, and glowing with late afternoon light. The clearing had been swept clean, and the children stood in a circle, faces eager but unsure. It was graduation day, except no one called it that. Salif simply called it a pause, a moment to mark that one chapter had ended and another was waiting. Marie stood beside a woven basket filled with seedlings, tiny trees with roots wrapped in damp cloth leaves, trembling as if sensing their future. She looked at the children one by one. Fauna, Amadou, the girl who sang times tables, the boy who could multiply with bottle caps. Not a single one wore shoes polished for ceremony, but each of them stood taller than when she'd first arrived. Salif spoke first, not loud but steady. You have learned letters, numbers, ideas. Now you carry them. Where you go next, they go too. Then he stepped back. Marie stepped forward, her heart beating strangely, not with nerves but something deeper, a kind of reverence. She picked up the first seedling and knelt in front of Fauna. This, she said gently, is not a certificate. The children giggled softly. Marie smiled. It won't hang on a wall. It won't prove anything to anyone else. But if you take care of it, if you plant it somewhere, the soil is strong, it will grow. She placed the seedling in Fauna's hands. Fauna stared at it like it might whisper something to her. Marie continued, moving to the next child. Plant it where your roots feel strong, where your heart says this is home. With each child, she repeated the gesture. No rush, no speech memorized, just presence and a tree. Amadou looked at his as if it were already 10 feet tall. They held their seedlings like scrolls of ancient knowledge, cradling the roots like treasure. A few whispered to one another about where they would dig. By the water, behind the well, near the acacia tree where they had learned subtraction. Then Fauna raised her hand. Marie looked down. Fauna's voice was soft but certain. Will the trees remember us? The question landed like a breeze across skin, unexpected but impossible to ignore. Marie blinked. She thought of the rain, the mud-streaked lessons, the broken pencils and banana leaf assignments. She thought of silence and return, of forgiveness not given but extended. Yes, Marie said finally, if you visit them, if you speak to them, if you tell them your dreams even when no one's listening. Fauna nodded solemnly as if this made sense. The children began to scatter, already choosing spots in the earth to dig. Salif brought out wooden spoons to help. A few used their hands. The red dirt gave way easily, still soft from last week's storms. Marie stood back and watched. It wasn't the kind of ceremony you photographed, but it was the kind you remembered. As the last sapling was planted, Marie opened her red notebook and wrote, no gowns, no diplomas, but roots were given today. And maybe that's the only graduation that matters. She closed the notebook slowly, fingers lingering on the cover. A light breeze passed through the clearing, rustling the leaves of a future not yet written. And beneath that sky, surrounded by children planting trees into soil that had once known only dust and war, Marie felt something quiet and true take root in her too. She wasn't here to change them. She had been changed. The sun was dipping low when Marie finally unfolded the thin blue paper. The letter had arrived crumpled at the edges, bearing the fading imprint of international postage, her name misspelled in familiar handwriting, half careless, half affectionate. It had taken weeks to arrive, forwarded through embassies sorted by dusty fingers, in mail stations with no walls. But it was here. She had written to him first. It had taken her 3 nights to finish the letter. She'd started it after the graduation when the children were asleep and the trees newly planted. She had crouched by the candle in her tent pen, trembling, unsure of what she was even trying to say. Papa, you once told me that we serve by standing still in broken places. I don't know if you remember. You said it during a storm. I didn't understand it then. Maybe you didn't either. She had paused, then written faster. I was sent here to serve power, to observe, to report. But I didn't serve anything, not at first. I just watched, until they made me see, not with facts, with joy, with subtraction in the dust, with a pencil passed like gold. And now, Papa, I don't know what country I serve anymore, but I know what kind of person I want to become. She'd folded the paper slowly as though folding part of herself inside it. Then she sent it, expecting nothing. Now beneath the shade of a mango tree, she unfolded the reply. The handwriting was rough, uneven, as if written on a train or in haste. Her heart beat faster. Marie, you remembered what I forgot to teach. I thought I was shielding you, giving you clarity, but I see now you needed contradiction to find your truth. I am proud, not because you stayed, but because you listened. She read it once, twice. By the 3rd time, the ink blurred from her tears. She pressed the letter against her chest, then folded it carefully and placed it into her red notebook between the pages, filled not with data, but with real names and real moments. No one else would ever need to see it. It was enough that she did. She sat in the dirt, still holding the scent of paper and dust and something like closure. "Why are you crying?" a voice asked softly. She looked up to see Fauna standing there with half a mango in her palm, its juice dripping onto her wrist. Marie sniffed, laughing despite herself. "Because someone I love remembered how to speak again." Fauna tilted her head, puzzled. Then, in typical Fauna fashion, she simply offered the mango. Marie took it with both hands and tore off a piece. It was warm from the sun and overripe, sticky and sweet. Amadou joined them a minute later with another piece, then two more children flopped beside them, unbothered by the earth or the silence. They ate together like that, barefoot, grounded, no celebration, no ceremony. Just mango and memory and the quiet power of words that traveled oceans to arrive in the right hands. It began not with an outline, but with a sentence. One night long after the last lesson of the day and the last song had faded into crickets and wind, Marie opened her red notebook and wrote, "This was supposed to be an assignment. Instead, it reassigned my soul." She paused, stared at the words, then she kept going. She didn't write for Paris, not for the diplomats or the superiors still waiting for her Phase 2 report. She wrote for the girl who dared to learn subtraction by lantern light, for the boy who chased knowledge through floods, for the man who taught without a salary with only limestone and courage, for herself, the version of her who first arrived in clean boots and left with dirt in her veins. It took 3 months. The story spilled like water she hadn't known she'd been holding. She titled it simply, "The Assignment That Reassigned My Soul." The manuscript was raw, unpolished, personal. It carried no academic footnotes, no references to institutional frameworks, but it carried voices, real ones, laughter and longing, and the silence between mistrust and forgiveness. She sent it to 3 French publishers. 2 didn't respond. 1 returned a formal letter. "While we appreciate your passion, the narrative may be perceived as emotionally biased and lacks critical neutrality." Marie read the line twice, then set it aside without anger. They hadn't understood, and maybe they weren't meant to. Instead, she sent it to a small Pan-African collective she discovered by accident, a circle of writers and teachers who published stories from the continent for those who lived its truths. 3 weeks later, she received a response. "Yes, we see what you see. Let's print it." The book was released with a hand-stitched cover, sold in open-air markets, read aloud in classrooms made of tin and palm leaves. It never reached bestseller lists, but it reached readers, and that was more than enough. The dedication read, "For the child who believes learning is freedom, and the teacher brave enough to learn from them." Marie kept 1 copy for herself, wrapped in cloth, tucked into her pack between a cracked compass and the last page of her red notebook. Sometimes she was invited to speak. She declined most invitations. She didn't need a podium. Instead, she returned often quietly with books in her hands and stories in her eyes. She sat in the dirt. She helped plant trees. She brought pencils, and when there weren't enough, she broke them in half. She never forgot the map that had brought her here, wrong, incomplete, indifferent. But she also never forgot what Fauna once asked, "Will the trees remember us?" She hoped they would, but even if they didn't, her book would. Marie wasn't told there would be a gathering. She had spent the morning sorting through worn notebooks, helping Salif prepare new math lessons, and wiping mango pulp off Fauna's cheeks. The day had felt like any other, dusty, warm, and alive with the rhythm of learning. But as the sun dipped behind the western hills and the light took on that late golden softness, she noticed something shift. Children whispered, elders appeared, women in vibrant wraps, men with walking sticks carved with stories. Salif gave her a brief, unreadable smile and motioned for her to follow him. He said nothing, only pointed toward the neem tree at the edge of the clearing, the one that had stood for generations, its roots older than memory, its shade deeper than silence. Beneath it they gathered. There were no chairs, no banners, no symbols of state or ceremony, only the people she had come to love and learn from, standing in a wide circle beneath the wind-stirred branches. She hesitated at the edge, unsure. "What is this?" TRAORÉ stepped forward. He had not seen her in weeks, maybe months. Time had blurred, but his presence hadn't changed, still grounded, still quiet, still a man who could command a room with a glance. "There are no medals today," he said, his voice calm but resonant. "No ribbons, no titles." He reached into a small cloth pouch tied to his belt and pulled out something delicate, a pendant carved from wood shaped like a tiny open book. Its pages were etched in lines so fine they caught the last light of day. He stepped closer and gently placed it over her neck. "We don't call you Diplomat," he said. His fingers brushed the back of her neck as he fastened the string. "We don't call you Teacher." Marie's throat tightened. Her hands instinctively touched the pendant. It was warm from his skin. "Today," TRAORÉ said, his voice lower, now filled with something neither solemn nor celebratory but true, "we call you Sister." For a long moment no one spoke. Then Fauna stepped forward and slipped her small hand into Marie's. Amadou followed, standing to her other side. The elders nodded slowly, some touching their hearts. One woman hummed not a song exactly, but something older, a sound that filled the air like dust before rain. Marie stood still, unsure if she could speak without shattering something. So she didn't speak. She just stood in the circle, not outside it, not observing it, but inside. With them, a sister. And somehow that word, simple, quiet, free of politics, meant more than any title she had ever worn. Later that night, as the village returned to its rhythm and the neem leaves whispered overhead, Marie opened her red notebook one last time. She turned to the back cover, the only blank space left, and wrote, "They gave me no flag. Only a name. And it was enough." She closed the book, kissed the wooden pendant gently, and held it against her heart. They began with nothing but a patch of earth and the shade of a tree. No funding, no blueprint, no approval stamped from above. Just a name, a belief, and a promise whispered beneath the neem leaves where it had all begun. École du cœur, the school of the heart. That's what she called it. Not for poetry, but for truth. Because everything that mattered had started there in the heart, not the head. Marie didn't plan to open a school. It happened the way some trees grow slowly at first without notice, then all at once. A mother asked if her niece could stay for lessons. Then a cousin arrived from across the border. Then a child from 3 villages over showed up at dawn with no shoes and a notebook wrapped in plastic to keep the rain out. So they began to build not with bricks but with people. They used mud for walls, flattened cans for writing surfaces, and empty rice bags for shade until proper roofing could come. There were no uniforms, no bells, just a simple rule written on a piece of canvas nailed to the door. Learn something, then teach it to someone else. And they did. Children who had learned to read helped those just learning letters. Older students became instructors before they ever stopped being pupils. Fauna led songs about multiplication. Amadou taught younger boys how to write their names, tracing each letter slowly as if blessing it. Salif stayed, of course, but he no longer taught alone. People started calling it a school, but it wasn't. Not really, it was a movement. Word spread, not through websites or flyers, but mouth to mouth, step by step. A teacher from Mali arrived one day, dusty and quiet, asking if he could stay a while to observe. A girl from Burkina Faso came with a folded poem in her hand, written phonetically because she hadn't yet learned spelling. A volunteer from Senegal brought chalk and sandals. No one asked for IDs. No one cared what flag you lived under. They came for learning and left with purpose. Marie watched it grow like something wild but determined. She no longer needed to hold every piece together. She simply tended the roots, watered the trust, and let the branches reach wherever they chose. One day a child asked her, "What subject is this school about?" Marie smiled. "All of them," she said, "but mostly being human." That night she sat outside, the sky wide above her, the air buzzing with soft laughter from the dormitory huts. She opened a new notebook, this one bound in banana fiber, gifted by a visiting writer from Ghana. On the first page she wrote, "The most radical education is love made visible." She paused, then added, "And love when taught never stops multiplying." The globe was no longer in a textbook, it was in the dirt. Fauna and Amadou had started it one morning after lessons, with no permission, just curiosity and a few flat stones. They cleared a circle in the dust maybe a meter wide and began placing pebbles where they thought continents might be. They didn't always get it right, but somehow it felt more accurate than the real thing. Soon the others joined. Some brought bits of charcoal to sketch coastlines. Others shaped rivers with fingers and sticks. Someone added bottle caps as capitals. Salif gave them a rusted compass. And Marie knelt beside them and said nothing, only smiled as the world took shape again beneath their hands. She watched Fauna crouch beside the West Africa section. The girl pressed a small mango seed into the dust and declared, "Burkina Faso." Another child pointed to a tiny stone in the corner. "France," he asked. Marie nodded. "Yes, that's France." The group leaned in closer, squinting. Someone laughed. "It's so small," Marie laughed too. "Yes, it is." They didn't say it to mock her. They said it with pride because suddenly the world felt different, less centered around distant capitals, more balanced, more honest. Later that day, Marie went to her tent. She pulled out the canvas satchel she had once carried across borders, once filled with reports, stamped letters, credentials that no longer held weight. On the side, her official French diplomatic badge was still stitched there, blue, white, red, the stitched seal of an empire. She stared at it for a long time. Then she took out needle and thread. Carefully, patiently, she began sewing a second patch beside it, green, red, and gold with a yellow star in the center. The flag of Burkina Faso. She didn't remove the French one. That wasn't the point. She simply added to it. And then with quiet hands she drew a line, just a single black line through the old badge. Not to erase it. Just to remind herself it wasn't the only truth anymore. That night under the open stars, Marie sat with the children again. They had built constellations out of chalk dots on the blackboard, naming them not after Greek gods, but after words they had learned. Tomorrow, courage, sister. One child leaned back against her shoulder. "Will we ever see the real globe?" he asked sleepily. Marie looked up at the sky, then down at the dirt. "You already have," she whispered, "and you helped build it." No one answered, but that was the beauty of it. Some truths don't need replies, just remembering. And in the silence that followed, not heavy but full, the stars above and the stones below began to feel like parts of the same map. A map not drawn by power but by presence, not published but planted. And on that map, names didn't mark borders. They marked belonging. Marie grew old without noticing. Not because the years didn't show her back curved a little more. With each season, her hands carried sun and stories in their lines, but because her life was never measured in time. It was measured in lessons, in names learned, in pencils passed from one hand to the next. She no longer walked far. Others came to her now barefoot and bright-eyed, notebooks, open questions tumbling out before greetings. She taught slowly, with more silence than speech. She had learned long ago that a pause could be more powerful than instruction. That space given with trust was where growth rooted deepest. And she trained the youngest to teach, not just to read or count, but to witness, to listen, to ask what matters most here before offering any answer. Her days were gentle, rhythmic. Morning light voices in the courtyard, children reciting multiplication under neem trees. Midday shade, afternoon laughter, evening wind. Then one morning she didn't rise. Fauna found her seated in her chair beneath the canvas awning, a folded shawl across her shoulders, her face turned slightly to the side. Peaceful. Still. The red notebook rested in her lap. The last page was open. Her handwriting slightly slower now, but steady, had filled one final line. "There is no nation without its children." They didn't ring a bell. They didn't announce anything. The village simply moved into silence, the kind that honored without asking, the kind that knew. They buried her beneath the neem tree, not because she had asked, she hadn't left instructions, but because that was where she had become part of them. It was where she had first stood outside the circle and later been welcomed inside. No flag draped the body, no national anthem played, no officials came, only students, only stories, only tears and gratitude. Salif spoke first, but only briefly. "She was not from here," he said, "but she gave us pieces of herself until she was." Then Fauna stepped forward. Now taller, older, her voice steady. She carried Marie's satchel, the one that had once held reports and maps now faded and worn. She placed it gently at the base of the neem tree. Behind her, a young girl barely 7 stepped to the chalkboard. It had been carried out from the classroom and propped beside the grave. The girl raised a piece of white chalk and wrote carefully, each word whispered by the crowd as it formed. She arrived to report. She stayed to repair. No one clapped. but the wind moved through the leaves above, and the chalk didn't smudge. And that was enough. Years passed. École du Cœur. The School of the Heart now spanned 8 villages each, one shaped by its own needs but bound by the same rule. Learn something, then teach it to someone else. The original courtyard remained quiet but alive. Chickens still wandered between the classrooms. Children still shouted tables and song. A new generation taught beneath the neem tree, now taller than any child could climb. In the center of the main building, inside a handmade glass case, sat the red notebook. No alarm, no velvet rope, just a single wooden basket beside it. Children left things there. Pieces of chalk, worn erasers, notes scribbled on banana paper. Sometimes a small drawing of Marie, always smiling, always holding a pencil. Visitors came, teachers, dreamers, doubters. They stood in front of the case reading her words. Some cried, some smiled. Many whispered the same phrase before they left. She didn't forget who she was. She became who she was meant to be. No statue was built, no street renamed, but every child who picked up a pencil from that basket carried her story forward. And in that quiet passing from hand to hand, word to word, one small question at a time, her legacy lived on. Not in marble, but in movement. What moved me most about this story wasn't just Marie's transformation, it was how quiet that transformation was. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic moments of revelation. Instead, we watched a woman slowly unlearn the systems that shaped her, and instead let herself be shaped by the voices that were never meant to be heard. This story reminds us that the most meaningful change often begins with discomfort. Marie was sent to observe, to uphold structure, to represent power, but it was the barefoot children, the teacher with no salary, and the questions whispered in broken French that taught her what education and dignity really mean. There's a quiet courage in choosing to stay, to listen longer, to put down your report and pick up someone else's truth. In a world obsessed with status, speed, and scale, this story invites us back to the basics. Who are we when no one is watching? What happens when we stop trying to fix others and allow ourselves to be changed? Marie didn't become a hero. She became a sister. And in doing so, she reminded us that sometimes the smallest classroom can teach the biggest lesson. So here's my question for you. Have you ever walked into a place thinking you were there to help and realized you were the one being taught? If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Captain of Truth, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Captain of Truth.